Story 1. The wind outside howled, rattling the window panes of my small rental home on the outskirts of Austin, Texas. The town was quiet, the kind of place where people turned in early, and by midnight, not a single car passed on the streets. I had been up late, typing away at my desk, lost in research for my latest article. Missing persons cases, urban legends, things that people whispered about but never took seriously. Then, at 12:43 a.m., the knock came. It was soft, too soft, just a delicate tapping against the wood, barely audible over the wind. My fingers froze above the keyboard. I glanced at my phone, half expecting a message. No notifications. Another knock, this time more insistent. I turned my head toward the front door, my stomach twisting with unease. No one visited at this hour. My nearest neighbor was a mile down the road, and I had no friends in town. The rational part of my mind told me it could be someone lost, maybe in trouble. But deep inside, something felt off. I got up slowly, my footsteps nearly silent against the hardwood floor. The house was dark except for the glow of my laptop screen. I approached the door, pressing one eye to the peephole. Two children stood outside, a boy and a girl. They were dressed in old-fashioned clothes, too clean, too perfect, like something from a catalog decades ago. Their heads were lowered, their faces hidden by the porch's shadow. I hesitated. A cold prickle ran down my spine. Then the girl spoke. "Mister, please, we are lost. Let us in." Her voice was small, but there was no emotion in it. The boy lifted his hand and knocked again, louder. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. "Where are your parents?" I asked, my voice steady despite the dread pooling in my stomach. The girl raised her head slightly, but not enough for me to see her eyes. "They will be here soon. Please, we are scared." Something about the way she said it, too rehearsed, too precise, made my chest tighten. I flicked on the porch light, and that was when the fear truly hit me. The light did not reach them. It should have illuminated their faces, their features, but they remained shadowed, untouched by the glow. That was when I knew something was wrong. I stood frozen, my fingers gripping the edge of the doorframe. The porch light glowed above them, yet the children remained untouched by it, as if the light itself refused to acknowledge their presence. Something inside me screamed not to open the door. The girl shifted slightly. "Please, mister, we need to come inside." Her voice lacked urgency. It was flat, like a recording being played back. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to look at them properly. Their clothes were strangely pristine, despite the dirt road leading to my house. The boy's hoodie was spotless, and the girl's dress looked pressed, unstained. Their stillness was the worst part. Children fidget. They shuffle their feet. They breathe heavily when nervous. But these two were like statues standing unnaturally still. Then the girl lifted her face. My stomach clenched. Her skin was pale, too pale, like a wax figure pretending to be human. And her eyes were wrong, completely black, not just the pupils. The entire sclera was black, void-like, absorbing the light instead of reflecting it. A chill crawled up my spine. My first instinct was to slam the door, but something in me, a primal, suffocating fear, told me that reacting too quickly would be a mistake. "What is wrong with your eyes?" I managed, my voice low. Neither of them reacted. The boy finally lifted his head. His eyes were the same. I stepped back, suddenly aware that my breathing had become shallow. Every survival instinct in my body was screaming. "Let us in," the girl repeated, her tone the same. No anger, no pleading, just demand. The temperature inside my house dropped. I could see my breath in the air. That was impossible. It was Texas. It was summer. The boy's head tilted slightly, studying me. "We cannot come in unless you say yes." The words sent pure terror through my chest. They were waiting, not asking, not begging, waiting for permission, for me to say yes. A deep, unnatural pressure settled in my skull, like my mind was being pushed, forced to agree. I shook my head violently, stepping back. The girl frowned, not in anger, but confusion, as if she did not understand why I was resisting. Then the knocking started again, loud, rhythmic, too perfect. It was not coming from them. It was coming from somewhere behind me. I spun around, heart hammering. Nothing. The moment I looked back through the peephole, they were gone. Not walking away, not fading into the distance, just gone. The air around me felt lighter, the unnatural cold receding. But something told me this was not over. This was just the beginning. I did not sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them, their vacant black eyes, their unnatural stillness, the way they had waited for me to invite them in. By dawn, I was running on caffeine and paranoia. I needed answers. The town of Rockwell, Texas was small, the kind of place where everybody knew everybody. I had been here for a few months, working on an article about unexplained disappearances. But now, my investigation had taken an unexpected turn. I drove to the only diner in town, Maggie's Cafe. hoping someone had heard of the black-eyed children. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped in. The place was nearly empty, just a few early risers nursing their coffees. The waitress, a woman in her mid-50s named Deborah, looked up from behind the counter and gave me a polite nod. I ordered coffee, then leaned forward. Deborah, have you ever heard of kids showing up at people's doors at night, asking to be let in? Her face paled instantly. Her grip on the coffee pot tightened, knuckles turning white. For a moment, I thought she was going to ignore me. Then, in a low voice, she muttered, "You should not be asking about that." I frowned. Why not? She set the pot down with a sharp clink. Because people who talk about them, they disappear. A chair scraped against the floor behind me. I turned to see an old man at the corner booth, watching me intently. His name was Tom Westcott, one of the oldest residents in Rockwell. He motioned for me to come over. Deborah shot me a warning look, but I ignored it and slid into the booth across from him. Tom's voice was raspy. "You saw them, didn't you?" I tensed. "Yes." He nodded, as if he had expected my answer. "Did you let them in?" "No." He exhaled, relief crossing his lined face. "Then you still have a chance." A chill ran through me. A chance at what? Tom leaned forward, lowering his voice. "They are not kids. They never were. They are something old. Something that has been here longer than any of us." I swallowed hard. "What do they want?" His jaw tightened. "No one knows for sure. But if you let them in, you are gone. Just gone. Like you never existed." I shook my head. "That does not make sense. There have to be records, police reports, missing persons cases." Tom's eyes darkened. "You don't get it. The people who let them in, it's like they were never here to begin with. Their families forget them. Their homes go up for sale like they never existed. The town moves on like they were never real." I felt sick. "How do you know all this?" Tom hesitated, then rolled up his sleeve. His forearm was covered in old burn scars. "Because I let them in once, and I barely survived." My hands felt cold against the table. I stared at Tom's scarred arm, my mind racing. "You let them in?" My voice was barely above a whisper. Tom nodded slowly, his tired eyes meeting mine. "A long time ago. I was 17. I did not know better." I swallowed hard. "What happened?" He exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his stubbled chin. "They knocked on my door one night, just like you described. 2 of them. Eyes like oil slicks. I let them in, and the moment the door closed, I knew I had made a mistake. I leaned forward. "What did they do?" Tom's fingers trembled slightly. as he picked up his coffee cup. They just stood there, smiling. I felt sick, like my head was filling with static. My body stopped listening to me. I shuddered. And then his voice dropped to a near whisper. Then they reached for me. I don't remember much after that, just flashes of pain, of something clawing inside my mind. When I woke up, the house was on fire. My parents pulled me out just in time. The kids were gone. No footprints, no sign they had ever been there. But I was never the same after that. I looked at his scars again, the burn marks covering most of his forearm. I could tell there was more he was not saying. So, if you survived, why do people disappear? Tom sighed. I was lucky. Someone broke the connection before it was too late. Most people, they are not so lucky. I needed proof. That night, I combed through old newspaper archives, missing persons reports, anything that could tie these encounters together. The deeper I dug, the worse it got. The disappearances went back decades. Every 5 to 10 years, a cluster of missing persons cases popped up. No bodies, no evidence of struggle, just people who were there one day and gone the next. The descriptions matched. Each case involved a knock at the door late at night. Each case mentioned strange children being the last thing seen. The most recent case made my stomach twist. Just 3 months ago, a man named Brian Holloway, 42 years old, disappeared from his home on the edge of town. His neighbor reported hearing knocking at his door around 1 a.m., followed by a strange conversation with children. Brian's home security footage caught something chilling. At 12:57 a.m., Brian answered his door. He stood there, frozen, staring down at 2 children standing on his porch. No audio. Then, after exactly 4 minutes, he stepped aside. The kids entered. The door shut. Brian was never seen again. His house was later sold by distant relatives who claimed he had no close family. His employer said he had never worked there. It was as if Brian Holloway had never existed. My hand shook as I scrolled through the files. I needed to talk to someone who had seen them and lived. That was when I found her, Margaret Lawson, the only recorded survivor besides Tom. If anyone had answers, it was her. Margaret Lawson lived in a small, worn-down house on the far edge of town. The drive there was unsettling. The roads were empty, the sky overcast, and the wind barely stirred the trees. It felt like the world was holding its breath. Her house was different from the others. The windows were covered with thick black curtains, nailed shut from the inside. Strange symbols carved deep into the wooden doorframe lined the entrance. The front porch sagged under my weight as I knocked. No answer. I knocked again. For a long moment, silence. Then, slowly, the door creaked open just enough for me to see a single bloodshot eye peering out. "Go away, Mrs. Lawson, please," I said. "Go away." She tried to slam the door, but I shoved my foot into the gap. I know about them, the black-eyed children. I know you do too. The air changed. Margaret's expression flickered from anger to pure terror. Slowly, she exhaled. "You saw them, didn't you?" "Yes." For a moment, she just stared at me, as if deciding whether to let me in. Finally, she pulled the door open just enough for me to slip inside. Inside, the house was cluttered, but sealed off from the outside world. No windows, no natural light. Candles burned in the corners of every room. Margaret sat in a faded armchair, her hands clasped together. "You should not have come here. I need to know what they are." She swallowed hard, her fingers trembling. "They do not come alone, and they do not stop." Her words sent a chill through me. "What do they want?" She looked at me with something that resembled pity. "They want what they always want, an invitation." I shuddered. "Tom Westcott said he let them in, that he barely survived." Margaret's face darkened. "Then he did not tell you the whole truth." I leaned forward. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then rolled up the sleeve of her blouse. My breath caught in my throat. Her arm was covered in deep, jagged scars, not burns, claw marks. "They took my sister." I stared at her, heart pounding. "We were just kids. They knocked. We let them in. I woke up in the morning, and she was gone. No one remembered her. Not my parents, not my teachers. It was like she had never existed. But I remembered. I always remembered." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "And they knew I did." I felt something cold wrap around my ribs. "They kept coming back for you." Margaret nodded. "For years, but I never let them in again." I took a deep breath. "Then why do people disappear?" Her face was grim. "Because once they choose you, they do not stop. If you resist, they wear you down. They wait until you are alone, vulnerable, and then they take you another way." A loud crack outside made me jump. Margaret's face drained of color. "They found you." I turned slowly. Through the slats in the boarded-up window, I could see a child standing at the edge of her driveway, watching, waiting. Margaret grabbed my arm. "You need to leave. Now. But go. She shoved me toward the door, locking it the second I stepped out. I turned back, but she was already gone, disappearing into the darkness of her house. Then I looked toward the road. The child was still there. And as I stared, I realized it was one of the kids from my porch. I got in my car and drove fast. My hands trembled on the wheel, my mind racing. They had followed me. Margaret had spent decades hiding, sealing herself off from the world. But I had not. I had seen them. I had spoken to them. And now they were not going to stop. I kept glancing in the rear view mirror, expecting to see those soulless black eyes staring back at me. The roads were empty. The sky was a deep, bruised purple. It felt like the entire town was holding its breath. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my nerves were shot. My house looked different now. The same walls, the same door, but something about it felt wrong, like something was waiting for me inside. I stepped inside, locking the door behind me. The house was dark, silent. I pulled my phone from my pocket and checked the time. 11:57 p.m. A strange thought wormed its way into my brain. They always come late at night. I forced myself to take a breath. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe. Then my phone screen glitched. For a split second, it flickered, static lines distorting the display. A chill crawled down my spine. I checked the security cameras. They were there, standing at the edge of my driveway. 4 of them now, silent, unmoving. My breath caught in my throat. Their heads were lowered, but I could feel them staring at me. Then one of them lifted its head and smiled. A sharp knock echoed through the house. I jumped, my heart hammering against my ribs. The knocking came again, slow, deliberate. They were at the door. I took a shaky step back. Do not open it. Do not speak. Do not react. But then, a voice. Mister, please. It was the same voice from the first night. I clenched my fists, squeezing my eyes shut. We are lost. We need to come in. I turned up the volume on the security feed. No sound. My throat tightened. The cameras were showing them, but the audio was dead silent. Then the knocking grew louder, more frantic, and then it came from the back door too. My stomach dropped. I slowly turned, dread pooling in my chest. I had locked every door, every window, but somehow I knew they were already inside. A whisper brushed against my ear. Let us in. The room plunged into darkness. The power had gone out, and in the suffocating silence, I felt it. A presence standing right behind me. The air was thick, suffocating. My house, my safe space, was no longer my own. The power was gone. The darkness stretching endlessly around me. My skin prickled with an unbearable weight, an unseen presence pressing against my shoulders. I was not alone. The knocking had stopped, but I knew better than to believe they were gone. A whisper curled through the silence, so close it felt like it was inside my skull. "Let us in." My breath hitched. They were in the house. I turned slowly, my body moving as if through thick fog. My phone flashlight flickered, casting a weak, trembling glow into the living room. The shadows shifted unnaturally, warping, stretching. Then I saw them, standing in the corner, just beyond the reach of the light. 4 of them now. Their empty, black eyes locked onto mine. They did not move. They did not blink. They were waiting. A terrible realization settled in my bones. I had ignored them. I had refused them. But they did not need my permission anymore. They had found a way in. My voice barely worked. "What do you want?" The tallest child tilted its head. Its lips curled into a slow, unnatural smile. "You already know." A wave of nausea hit me. My knees buckled. My head filled with static. I clutched the side of the couch to steady myself, my vision blurring. It felt like something was pressing into my thoughts, unraveling them. Memories twisted. My mind, it was not my own anymore. They were erasing me. I forced myself to move. I stumbled toward the kitchen, grabbing the only thing that felt real, the salt shaker. I barely knew why. Margaret had symbols on her walls. Tom had burn scars. There had to be a reason. With shaking hands, I flung a handful of salt across the doorway. The moment it hit the floor, the air shifted. The children recoiled. The static in my head cleared. Their smiles faded. For the first time, I saw something else in their empty faces. Fear. The tallest child stepped forward, but hesitated. They could not cross the salt. Their voices shifted, layered, distorted, like a chorus speaking in unison. "This is not over." My head throbbed. I wanted to scream, to demand answers. What are you? Why me? But I knew better. They had lost their hold on me. For now. Then, one by one, they faded, like smoke dissolving into the night. The lights flickered back on. The air returned to normal. But I did not move, because I knew the truth now. They would come back. They always do. The days passed, but the fear never did. Every night I sat awake, expecting the knocking to return, expecting those black eyes to find me again. But they did not need to knock anymore. They had already been inside. Something in me had changed. I could feel it, the way my reflection lingered a second too long in the mirror, the way shadows moved in the corners of my vision. I had survived, but I was not sure I had escaped. I tried to warn people. I submitted my article on the black-eyed kids to every major publication. I contacted missing persons investigators, paranormal researchers, anyone who would listen. Nobody responded. At first, I thought I was being ignored. Then I noticed something worse. My emails vanished from my sent folder. My recorded interviews were gone. The files on my laptop deleted. Every note I had written about them had disappeared, like they had never existed, or worse, like I had never written them at all. I drove back to Rockwell, searching for Margaret. Her house was empty. No furniture, no boarded up windows, no signs that anyone had lived there in years. I checked public records. There was no record of a Margaret Lawson ever living in Rockwell. My skin went cold. I called Tom. The number was disconnected. I checked the diner. Deborah acted like she had never seen me before, like we had never spoken, like I was a stranger, like I had never been here at all. That night, I checked my driver's license. My name was still there, my address, but something felt wrong. I searched my own name online. Nothing. No articles. No social media. No records of my work, like I had never existed. The truth hit me like a freight train. I had not stopped them. I had just delayed the inevitable. 1 week later, the first knock came. Soft, slow, deliberate. I did not answer. Then another knock, and another. The knocks came from every door, every window. They were surrounding the house, waiting. Then a voice spoke through the silence. "Mister, please, let us in." I squeezed my eyes shut. I knew what would happen if I opened the door, but a darker thought crept into my mind. What if I already had? 3 days later, a new family moved into my house. They never found my body. They never looked. Because, as far as the world was concerned, I had never been there to begin with. But one night, as the new owners were settling in, their youngest daughter woke up. She heard knocking at the door, and outside, 2 children stood on the porch, waiting, smiling. Story 2. The first time the phone rang, I did not think much of it. It was a quiet evening in my apartment in Chicago, and I had just settled onto the couch, flipping through late-night TV. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, its screen glowing against the dim light. Unknown caller. I hesitated. It was nearly midnight. Probably a spam call. I reached for it, thumb hovering over the decline button. Then I saw the area code. My mother's. A cold weight settled in my stomach. She had passed away 6 months ago. My hand trembled as I answered, "Hello?" Silence. Then a faint crackling, like an old radio struggling for signal. A voice followed, distant and warbled, barely a whisper. "Sweetheart?" My breath hitched. It was her, my mother's voice, soft, unsure, like she had just woken up. I gripped the phone, my heart slamming against my ribs. "Mom?" More static. Then, "I do not have much time. You need to listen to me." A shiver ran down my spine. This was not right. My mother was gone. This could not be real. My grip tightened on the phone. "Mom, what is happening? Where are you?" The voice faltered, breaking into more static, as if she was struggling to stay on the line. "They do not want me to talk to you. A sharp click. The line went dead. My hand shook as I pulled the phone away, staring at the screen. The call log showed a number. A real number. Her number. But that was not possible. That number had been disconnected after she passed. I sat frozen, my body numb. Was this some cruel prank? A glitch? My stomach churned as I tried to rationalize it, but deep down, I already knew. That was my mother, and she was trying to warn me. I barely slept that night, tossing and turning, waiting for the phone to ring again. It never did. The next morning, I checked my call history, half expecting to find nothing, but it was there. A 7-minute call from my mother's number. My fingers trembled as I tapped it, trying to call back. Disconnected. My pulse pounded in my ears. I had to be losing my mind. I spent the day convincing myself it had been a dream, a trick of my grief. But the unease lingered. That night, as I lay in bed, the phone buzzed again. Unknown caller. My stomach twisted into knots. I hesitated before answering. "Hello?" Silence. My heart pounded against my ribs. "Mom?" Then a whisper. "He is in your house." My breath caught in my throat. The air turned ice cold. "What?" The line crackled. Her voice urgent. "Do not turn around." Every hair on my body stood on end. I was alone. The doors were locked. No one was here. But as I lay frozen in bed, phone clutched to my ear, I became painfully aware of the sound of breathing, not mine. The call ended. A deafening silence filled the room. My pulse throbbed as I reached for the lamp, my fingers shaking so violently that I nearly knocked it over. Light flooded the room. Nothing. I was alone. But the feeling of being watched did not leave. I checked the security footage from my front door camera. No movement. I scanned the hallway, the windows, empty. And yet, I could not shake the feeling that someone, something, was there, watching, waiting. For the next 3 nights, the calls continued. Each time, my mother's voice grew more frantic. He is getting closer. Do not answer the door. Do not speak to him. The last call came at 1:37 a.m. I was sitting on my couch, phone clenched tightly in my grip, waiting. My chest ached with anxiety as I answered. Mom, the line crackled, but she did not speak, just shallow breathing. Then the front door creaked. My blood ran cold. My gaze snapped to the door. It was unlocked, but I had locked it. I was sure I had locked it. My body refused to move. My mother's voice whispered through the phone, broken and hollow. He is inside. I threw the phone down and ran out of the apartment, into the hall, down the stairs, barefoot, not caring who I woke. My breath came in ragged gasps as I burst outside. The cold night air burning my lungs. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Another call. Unknown caller. My shaking fingers hesitated before answering. Please, I whispered. Mom, what is happening? The static swallowed her voice. Then, laughter. Slow, distorted, wrong. A deep, rasping voice followed. Nothing like my mother. You should not have answered. I did not sleep that night. I could not. The voice on the phone, that thing pretending to be my mother, had laughed. A slow, crawling sound that made my skin feel too tight. I sat on the floor of my apartment, lights on, staring at my phone, half expecting it to ring again. It did not, but something felt wrong. The air was heavier, thick with an invisible weight pressing against my chest. I kept replaying the call in my head. You should not have answered. My fingers tightened around my phone. I needed to understand what was happening. A part of me still clung to the idea that this was a horrible prank, some sick joke played by someone who had gotten access to my mother's old number. But deep down, I knew better. I called the number back. My stomach twisted as I listened to the dead silence on the other end, my pulse hammering against my skull. Then, a single click, a voicemail. My own voice whispered back at me, soft and distorted. Why are you calling me? You should not have answered. My blood ran cold. I yanked the phone away from my ear, my chest rising and falling too fast. I had never left that voicemail. I had never said those words. My hands trembled as I checked the call history. The incoming call from my mother's number was still there, but now there was an outgoing call, too. A call I had never made, and it had lasted exactly 2 minutes and 37 seconds. My breath hitched. That was the same time every call had come in. 1:37 a.m. I needed help. I called my friend Daniel, my only real support since my mother passed. It was nearly dawn, but I did not care. He picked up on the second ring, his voice groggy. "Damn, are you okay?" I struggled for words. Something is happening. He must have heard the fear in my voice, because he immediately sobered. "I am coming over." 20 minutes later, he was at my door, his expression tight with concern. I told him everything: the calls, the whispers, the voicemail. He listened in silence, his jaw clenched. When I finished, he exhaled sharply. "You are sure it was her number?" I nodded, unlocking my phone to show him, but when I pulled up my call log, the number was gone. The call history was blank. The proof had been erased. My heart slammed against my ribs. It was here. It was real. Daniel frowned. "Look, I believe you, but this is messed up." He hesitated before adding, "Maybe we should check your mom's old phone records, see if there is any activity on the number." My stomach churned. The idea made me nauseous, but I needed answers. We logged into her old account. The moment the page loaded, my breath caught in my throat. There had been an outgoing call from her number the night before, but the number she had called was mine. My vision blurred with fear. My mother had been dead for 6 months. Her phone had been shut off. That number should not exist anymore. And yet, the record showed a call made at 1:37 a.m. Daniel swore under his breath. "This is not possible." I swallowed, my throat dry. "Then, how did it happen?" His eyes flickered toward my phone. Maybe someone reactivated her number." He did not sound convinced. Neither was I. I tried to steady my breathing, but the room felt smaller, the walls pressing inward. "We should check the voicemail again," I whispered. Daniel hesitated before nodding. I put the phone on speaker and played it. My distorted voice whispered through the speaker, "Why are you calling me? You should not have answered." A sickening silence followed, and then something else, a faint, rhythmic sound. Breathing, but not mine, not Daniel's. Something else was listening. The room's temperature dropped. The sound grew louder, closer, filling the space around us. And then a soft, dragging scrape against the hardwood floor. Daniel's eyes widened. That was from inside the apartment. My blood turned to ice. We turned our heads slowly toward the hallway. The door to my mother's old bedroom, the one I never used anymore, was slightly ajar. I knew I had closed it. My stomach twisted violently. Something was in there. Daniel reached out, hesitantly pushing the door open. The room was dark. The only light came from the dim glow of the city outside. But as my eyes adjusted, I saw it. The phone. My mother's old landline, sitting on the bedside table, off the hook. Daniel and I exchanged a terrified glance. The line was still connected. The soft breathing continued. Then a whisper, so faint, I almost missed it. I told you not to answer. I could not move. My mother's old landline was off the hook, the faint glow of its screen casting eerie shadows across the room. The breathing on the other end of the line was rhythmic, deliberate, as if whoever or whatever was there wanted me to hear it. My throat was dry. My fingers curled into my palms, my pulse hammering against my ribs. Daniel took a cautious step forward, his expression set in stone. This is not possible, he whispered, but I barely heard him. My eyes were locked on the phone, my mind struggling to make sense of what I was seeing. That landline had not worked in years. It had been disconnected when my mother passed. And yet, the line was active. The screen displayed an ongoing call, 3:12 a.m. The soft breathing continued. And then, a voice. You should not have called me back. My stomach turned to ice. I grabbed Daniel's wrist, my breath coming in short gasps. Do you hear that? He nodded, his face pale. The voice on the phone was not my mother's. It was something else, something pretending to be her. It spoke again, the words slow, deliberate. Why are you still here? My jaw clenched. Who are you? Silence. Then a low, almost amused whisper. You already know. A sharp burst of static cracked through the line, making us both jump. The air in the room shifted, thick with something unseen, something oppressive. My ears rang. Daniel reached out slowly and pressed the end call button. The screen went dark. The silence that followed was worse. I turned to him, my hands shaking. We need to leave. We rushed to the door, my fingers fumbling with the locks. I yanked it open, only to freeze mid-step. My stomach lurched. The hallway outside was wrong. The familiar flickering of the apartment's old ceiling light was gone. Instead, the hallway was bathed in an unnatural, sickly yellow glow. The air was still, too still. It felt off, tensed beside me. This is not right. My phone vibrated violently in my pocket. I nearly dropped it in my panic. Unknown caller. My heart slammed against my ribs. The number was different, but the time was the same. 1:48 a.m. The screen flickered, glitching slightly, as if the call was not meant to exist. My hands trembled as I answered. The line was silent for a long, suffocating moment. Then my own voice whispered back, "Do not go outside." The breath caught in my throat. My body went cold. My hands went numb. Daniel grabbed my wrist, his eyes wide with terror. "That was you," he whispered. "That was your voice." I could not breathe. The call ended abruptly, the screen going black. A chill crept up my spine, curling around my ribs like invisible fingers. I looked back at the hallway. The air shifted. A shape stood at the far end, still, watching, not moving. My pulse pounded against my skull. "Shut the door," my voice barely worked. Daniel did not hesitate. He slammed it shut, locking it again. We stumbled back, breathless. My phone vibrated. Another call. The same number. The new time, 3:25 a.m. Daniel grabbed my wrist. "Do not answer it." But I already knew. It did not matter if I answered. It did not matter if I ignored it. It was already inside. The air grew heavy. The shadows in the corners of the room stretched, deepening. The temperature plummeted. A slow, rhythmic tapping echoed from inside the walls. My breath came in short, shallow bursts. Daniel's eyes darted around the room. "We need to get out." But there was no way out. Not anymore. My phone buzzed one last time. I did not need to check the screen. I knew who was calling. The lights flickered violently, plunging the apartment into shifting darkness. A sharp pressure built in my skull, like something was pushing into my thoughts, forcing itself in. Daniel grabbed my arm, shaking me. "Do not listen to it." My vision blurred. My ears rang. The tapping inside the walls grew louder, turning into pounding. The whispers came next, soft, layered, too many voices. And then my mother's voice cut through it all. "Let me in." The apartment door rattled violently. I turned, my body moving on its own. My breath hitched. The locks were undone. The door creaked open an inch. My phone screen flickered. The last thing I saw before the power cut out completely was the time. 3:25 a.m. The door creaked open, just an inch, but the darkness beyond it felt limitless. My breath caught in my throat as the shadows inside seemed to move, shifting unnaturally. Daniel reached for me, his fingers digging into my arm. "Do not go near it." His voice was barely a whisper. My phone buzzed violently in my pocket. I swallowed hard and looked down. Unknown caller. 4:06 a.m. My stomach clenched. The screen flickered. The call was coming from inside my apartment. A sharp sinking dread rooted itself in my chest. I forced myself to answer. "Hello?" Static crackled through the lines, sharp and grating, like something trying to form words but failing. My breath hitched. The static faded, replaced by a faint, wet sound. Breathing, deep, slow, too close. Daniel shook his head violently, mouthing, "Hang up." But my hands would not move. My fingers felt locked around the phone, an unnatural force keeping them there. Then the voice came. Not my mother's, not mine. Just wrong. "Do you remember?" My pulse pounded against my skull. "What?" The voice shifted, layered, as if more than one person was speaking. "You called me first." My knees buckled. The air around me tightened. No, that was not right. I had never called. Had I? I tried to shake the thought away, but the voice continued. "We have been waiting." The screen flickered. The call was still active. But now, something else was there. A second line. A second caller. My number. My vision swam. "This is not real," I whispered, gripping my temples. "This is not real." The call cut out. Silence suffocated the air. The door swung open all the way. The darkness inside pulsed, moved. Daniel grabbed my wrist. "Run." We stumbled back, nearly tripping over the coffee table as we bolted toward the front door. But the moment I grabbed the handle, an overwhelming pressure sank into my skull, like something was inside me. My vision blurred. My ears rang. I could feel it, moving through my thoughts, rewriting something I could not remember. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself forward. I threw open the door. The hallway was wrong again, stretched, endless. No doors, no exits, just a long, narrow corridor lined with nothing but darkness. My stomach twisted violently. "This is not my building," Daniel muttered, his voice shaking. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone. No service, no Wi-Fi. The last call remained on my screen, still active, frozen At 4:06 a.m., I pressed end call. The screen flickered. The call would not disconnect. My pulse thundered in my ears. I turned to Daniel, but his expression shifted. His mouth opened slightly, his eyes unfocused. I reached out. Daniel? He blinked, but not at me. He was staring past me. I turned slowly. The hallway was no longer empty. A figure stood at the far end, motionless, watching. My breath hitched. My first instinct was to run, but something about the figure held me still, the way its head tilted ever so slightly, like it was listening. My phone vibrated in my hand. Unknown caller, 4:06 a.m., but that was not possible. The call was already active. My stomach twisted into knots. My trembling fingers hovered over the answer button. I had no choice. I answered. The voice on the other end was mine. Do not move. My blood ran cold. My own voice, flat, emotionless, not me. A slow breath hissed through the speaker. Then, it sees you. A rush of cold air wrapped around me. The figure at the end of the hall stepped forward. One step, then another. My phone vibrated again. Another call. Daniel's number. But Daniel was beside me. I turned, my stomach lurching. He was pale, trembling, but alive. My phone rang again. The same number, the same time, over and over. Call after call, all from us. I felt my body shutting down, my brain rejecting what was happening. This was not real. This could not be real. The figure moved closer, and for the first time, I saw its face, mine. Not a reflection, not a shadow. Me. Eyes hollow, expression blank, mouth twitching as if trying to form words. I staggered back. What do you want? My own voice responded. From the phone, from the hallway, from inside my own mind. To finish the call, my breath came in short gasps. Daniel gripped my arm, shaking me. We have to go. But where? There was no way out, no escape. The hallway stretched into infinity. The doors were gone. The lights flickered once, then cut out completely. Total darkness. And then the final whisper, slipping through the void, pressing into my bones. You called us first. The darkness swallowed everything. No hallway, no walls, no doors, just an endless, suffocating black void. My phone vibrated against my palm, the screen's weak glow the only thing anchoring me to reality. The call was still active. 4:06 a.m. I could hear breathing, not mine, not Daniel's, something else. My pulse pounded in my ears. I lifted the phone to my ear, my hands shaking. The voice came through, faint and layered, as if multiple voices were speaking at once. You called us first. My throat tightened. My mind reeled, clawing for logic. I never called you. Silence. Then a whisper. Check your messages. My body stiffened. The call cut off. My phone screen flickered. A new notification appearing. One new voicemail. My hand trembled as I tapped it open. The message began to play. Static hissed through the speaker, followed by my own voice. But I had never recorded this. The voice was hollow, distant. I am lost. A pause. It is so dark here. Another pause. I cannot get out. My stomach twisted into knots. The final words came out strangled, nearly drowned in static. Please, pick up. I felt a wave of nausea. My own voice, begging for what? From where? My mind refused to accept it. Daniel yanked the phone from my hand, his face pale as he replayed the message. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. That is you. A cold sweat coated my skin. No, that is not me. That is not possible. The screen glitched again. Another voicemail appeared. Timestamp 4:06 a.m. Daniel hesitated before pressing play. A low, distorted hum filled the air, stretching out for what felt like forever. Then the whispering started. Dozens of voices, overlapping, whispering our names. My breath hitched. Daniel took a step back. This is not real. This cannot be real. The whispers grew louder. The darkness around us felt denser, as if something was pushing in. The voices merged into a single, unified breath. Then, turn around. I did not. I could not. But Daniel did. His entire body tensed. His grip on my wrist tightened to the point of pain. I forced myself to look. The void behind us was shifting, no longer empty. Something was there. A shape, blurry and shifting, its form flickering in and out of existence. A tall figure, standing impossibly still. My own voice whispered from the phone, repeating the voicemail. I am lost. The shape moved. My vision swam. I grabbed Daniel and bolted forward, running blindly through the void. But there was no end, no direction, just darkness stretching infinitely. My legs burned. My lungs ached. And then a door. Out of nowhere, standing alone in the black, a single door, white, plain, waiting. reached it first, yanking the handle. It would not budge. My phone vibrated. Another voicemail. The shaking in my hands was uncontrollable, but I opened it. The voice was distorted, almost mocking. You do not belong here. I slammed my palm against the door. Let us out. Daniel clawed at the frame, his breaths ragged. The door creaked. The shape was closer now, just feet away. It had no face, just a void, a swirling emptiness where a person should be, and it was reaching for me. The door burst open. We tumbled forward, hitting solid ground. My ears rang. The air changed. I gasped, my vision clearing. We were back. My apartment, the lights were on. The hallway was normal. My phone was gone. I scrambled to my feet, my entire body trembling. Daniel. He was there, panting, eyes darting around the room. The door we had come through was gone, vanished. We stood there in breathless silence. Then my home phone rang, the old landline, the one that should not work. My stomach twisted violently. Unknown caller. Daniel's voice cracked. Do not answer it. The ringing continued, relentless, piercing the air like a scream. My hand hovered over the receiver. I had to know. My fingers curled around it. I lifted it to my ear. Silence. Then, my own voice. You never should have left. The old landline in my apartment should not have been ringing. It had been disconnected for years, and yet it kept ringing, the sharp mechanical sound cutting through the silence like a knife. My fingers hovered over the receiver, my pulse hammering in my throat. Daniel grabbed my wrist. Do not answer it. His voice was raw, shaking, but I had already answered before. I had already let it in. My hand trembled as I lifted the receiver, pressing it to my ear. Silence, the kind that stretched too long, the kind that was not empty. My breath hitched. Then the static, low at first, a distant hum, then crackling louder. A faint voice wove through it. Not mine, not my mother's, just wrong. You never should have left. My stomach twisted violently. The voice was familiar, but distorted. Who is this? I whispered. Static. Then laughter, slow, drawn out, mocking. And then, click. The line went dead. The phone went silent. I swallowed hard and turned to Daniel. His face was pale, but his eyes were locked on something behind me. My heart dropped. I turned slowly. The old rotary phone sat on the small table by the hallway, its cord twisted, the receiver now off the hook. But it was not the phone that stopped me. It was the red light, blinking softly, the voicemail light. My skin prickled. I had never set up voicemail on this phone. My body felt like lead as I reached out and pressed play. The machine whirred to life. Static buzzed. And then my own voice. I am outside. A chill rippled down my spine. Daniel stepped back. His breathing was uneven. That is you. My pulse pounded. I did not leave that. The static shifted, distorting the message, stretching the words into something unnatural. I am outside. Let me in. The lights in the apartment flickered. The air turned frigid. My body locked up. A slow, deliberate knock echoed from the front door. Daniel's hand closed around my arm. Do not open it. My head shook numbly. I was never outside. Another knock, harder this time. The voicemail continued playing, my own voice warping through the static. Let me in. The door handle twisted. My chest tightened. The locks were still engaged, but the door shook as if something was testing it. I took a shaky step back. My phone buzzed violently in my pocket. I grabbed it with trembling fingers. Unknown caller. A new number. A new time. 3:42 a.m. Daniel whispered, "Do not answer." But my body moved on its own. The call connected. My own voice whispered through the speaker, "Open the door." My throat closed. No. The voice on the other end exhaled slowly. I see you. My knees nearly buckled. I turned back to the front door. The peephole was dark, black. Something was covering it. My heartbeat slammed against my ribs. The door rattled violently. Daniel grabbed me. We have to go. But the moment he reached for the hallway door, my phone rang again. Another number, another message. Voicemail received. I swallowed thickly, dread seeping into my bones as I pressed play. A deep, unnatural silence filled the space. Then, footsteps inside the apartment. My breath hitched. Daniel and I both turned toward the bedroom. The air grew dense and heavy, pressing into my skin like unseen hands. A shadow stretched across the hallway. Someone was in there. The voicemail crackled. My voice came through again. I told you not to answer. The bedroom door creaked open an inch. I could not breathe. The voicemail continued, my voice twisting. Now it knows where you are. The bedroom door slammed open. The light in the room died. A cold gust of air rushed past us. My phone buzzed one final time. A new call. I barely had time to react before the apartment went dark. The call connected on its own. The last thing I heard before everything faded was a whisper, so close, so impossibly near. It might have been in my own head. It is already inside. The darkness inside the apartment felt alive. It was thick, suffocating, pressing into my chest like unseen hands. My phone was still in my grip, vibrating violently with another incoming call. The screen flickered, the number unfamiliar, the time reading 3:58 a.m. Daniel was breathing hard beside me, his hand gripping my wrist so tightly it hurt. "Do not answer it," he whispered. But the ringing would not stop. It buzzed against my palm, demanding to be heard. My body was frozen. I did not want to know what would happen if I picked up, but a worse fear clawed at my mind. What if it never stopped? My throat was dry as I finally swiped the screen. "Hello?" The voice on the other end made my stomach turn. It was me, but not my voice as it was now. My voice from the future. Older, strained, shaking. "You have to listen to me," the voice whispered. "You have to leave. Right now." My blood ran cold. "Who are you?" My own voice, my future self, let out a shaky breath. "There is no time. It knows you. It is coming." The air around us thickened. The temperature plummeted. Daniel grabbed my shoulder. "Hang up." But I could not. My future self was crying. "You need to go. You need to..." The voice cut off with a strangled gasp. A sharp static screech burst through the speaker. Then something else. A deep, rasping breath. A sound that did not belong to me. And then a whisper. Too late. The call ended. My stomach lurched. I turned to Daniel, but before I could speak, a loud thud echoed from the bedroom. My pulse spiked. Something was in there. A slow, deliberate scraping followed, like nails dragging against the wooden floor. Daniel's face paled. "It is already inside." My hands shook as I grabbed him, pulling him toward the door. But the moment I reached for the lock, my phone buzzed again. A new message. My breath caught as I read the words glowing on the screen. "Do not open the door." A sharp knock echoed from the other side. I felt the blood drain from my face. My fingers hovered over the lock. Something in my gut told me whoever was knocking was not here to help. The air shifted behind me. The bedroom door creaked open. I spun around, my heart slamming into my ribs. The lights in the hallway flickered violently. The scraping sound grew closer. Daniel pulled me back, his breathing erratic. We need to move. But the hallway had changed. It was longer. Impossible. The walls stretched on endlessly. The front door, now a distant blur. My body refused to process it. I reached for my phone again. One more voicemail. I hesitated before pressing play. My own voice came through, trembling. It is behind you. The words barely sank in before the cold breath touched my neck. I choked on a scream, whipping around. Nothing. The air pressed into my skin, thick with unseen weight. My head spun. I grabbed Daniel's hand, yanking him forward. We bolted down the hallway. The front door loomed ahead, but it kept getting farther. The scraping turned into pounding. It was chasing us. Daniel gasped, pulling at me harder. Run! The hallway twisted. The walls darkened. I stumbled, my vision blurring. My phone slipped from my grasp, clattering onto the floor. The screen flickered. One final message. It is already there. A deafening crash came from behind us. The lights died. For a moment, everything was silent. A cold, creeping breath slithered against my skin. The air shifted. And then, just as the world tilted into darkness, the door opened. The door opened, but not to safety. Instead of the outside world, there was only darkness, a void that stretched beyond comprehension, swirling, alive. My body locked up, my breath catching in my throat. Daniel grabbed my arm, but I could not move. The apartment was gone. The hallway was gone. We had stepped into something else, somewhere we were never meant to be. My phone lying face up on the warped floor buzzed one last time. Unknown caller. The time flickered, 4:13 a.m. Daniel's voice was tight, desperate. Do not answer it. But we both knew it did not matter anymore. The calls had never been a choice. My fingers twitched as I to reach out for the phone. My hands moved on their own as if something else was pulling the strings. I swiped the screen, pressing it to my ear. Silence. Then my own voice. You stayed too long. My stomach clenched. The whispering around us grew louder. Shadows stretched from the void, shifting unnaturally, their movements jagged and wrong. My voice on the phone continued, "You should have left when you had the chance." A single breath came through the speaker, cold and final. "Now, you never will." The door slammed shut behind us. The darkness closed in. Daniel grabbed me, pulling me backward, but there was no floor left to stand on. The void swallowed us whole. The feeling was impossible, falling without moving, sinking without weight. My ears rang, my vision blurred. The phone was still in my grip, the call still connected. A sound slithered through the speaker, not a voice, not static, something breathing, something waiting. Then a sharp, piercing tone, a dial tone, but it did not stop. It rang and rang and rang, growing louder until it consumed everything. My skull throbbed, my eyes shut tight, and then silence. I gasped awake. The apartment was normal. The lights were on. The hallway was back. My chest heaved as I stumbled forward, gripping the table for balance. My phone sat on the table, off. No missed calls, no voicemails, nothing. Daniel was standing beside me, shaking, his face pale. Was that real? My breath came in ragged bursts. I do not know. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "We need to leave. Now." I nodded, grabbing my keys, my hands still trembling. We bolted for the door, but as I reached for the handle, my phone buzzed. The sound shattered the fragile reality around me. My stomach lurched as I turned back. Unknown caller. Daniel's face twisted in horror. My fingers tingled, hovering over the screen. "It is over," I whispered to myself. "It has to be over." But deep down, I knew better. The phone rang again and again. The same number, the same time. I turned the phone over, refusing to look at it, forcing myself to breathe. But the ringing did not stop. It never stopped. And somewhere, in the distance, just barely audible, beneath the buzzing tone, I heard my own voice whispering back at me. You never hung up. If this story left you questioning reality, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, because the next time your phone rings in the middle of the night, you might not be able to ignore it. Have you ever heard of a real-life phone call from the dead? Let me know in the comments below, and whatever you do, do not pick up.